The snow of Frost Creek hides more than ice. It hides truth, a child's cry, a wounded K-9, and 2 officers trapped beneath a frozen river. What began as an accident became a hunt, for faith, for justice, for family long lost. In a town where loyalty bleeds and miracles wear scars, one storm will reveal everything. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and the light God leaves in the snow. The morning light crawled across Frost Creek like a hesitant prayer. Snow lay heavy over the pines, swallowing the sound of the river beneath its thin sheet of ice. The air was sharp, metallic, and so still it seemed afraid to move. 10-year-old Leah Monroe trudged along the narrow path beside the frozen water, her breath forming clouds that rose and vanished like ghosts. She was small for her age, with pale cheeks bitten by the cold and honey-blonde hair that peeked from beneath a red wool hat, slightly too big for her head. Her boots squeaked against the snow, and though her nose was pink, there was determination in her gray eyes, a quiet stubbornness inherited from the man who raised her. Beside her padded Ranger, her grandfather's old German shepherd. Once a proud police K-9, Ranger was now 11, his sable coat peppered with gray, one ear folded from an old injury that never quite healed. His movements were slower these days, but his gaze remained keen, dark amber eyes that missed nothing. There was a steadiness to him, the kind of loyalty that carried the weight of memory. He walked close to the girl's leg, occasionally glancing up as if to remind her he was there. "Just to the river and back," Henry Monroe had said that morning, his voice rough with the gravel of age. Henry was a man in his late 60s, tall once, though time had curved his shoulders. His face was a map of deep lines carved by Montana winters and years of law enforcement duty. A limp in his right leg made each step deliberate. Since his retirement, the uniform had been replaced by thick flannel shirts and suspenders, but the habit of vigilance never left his eyes. After his daughter's death 2 years ago, Henry had become Lia's guardian, a role that softened the man without dulling the steel in him. Lia thought of him now as she walked. He'd been coughing more lately, one hand always hovering near his chest. She didn't like how his breath came shorter with each passing day. She tugged the scarf tighter around her face, pretending it was just the cold. "Come on, Ranger," she murmured, her voice muffled. The old dog huffed, shaking snow from his muzzle. The river was a long silver scar through the white world. Beneath its icy surface, faint currents murmured like secrets. Lia crouched at the edge, watching small air pockets drift under the frozen crust. There was beauty here, and loneliness too, the kind that pressed on a child's chest until her breath trembled. Ranger stood still beside her, ears pricked, his tail stiffened. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Ranger moved toward the water, slow and deliberate. His nose brushed the snow, tracing an invisible trail. Then his body tensed, hackles rising. He barked once, loud, urgent. The sound echoed across the creek, startling a cluster of birds from the pines. Lia followed his gaze and froze. At first she thought it was driftwood, a dark shape half-trapped beneath the ice. But as she stepped closer, her stomach twisted. It wasn't wood, a hand, pale, still. The blue fabric of a uniform sleeve caught the sunlight, and a glint of metal, a police badge, shimmered beneath the ice. "Oh no!" Lia's breath hitched. "Ranger, stay." She dropped to her knees, pressing her small hands against the cold surface. Beneath it, the shape of a woman's face appeared, lips blue, eyes closed, hair fanned out like a golden halo, distorted by the freezing water. Without thinking, she yanked off her mittens and began scraping at the ice. Her fingers stung, but she didn't stop. Ranger barked again, circling frantically, claws scraping the crust of snow. "Help me, boy," she gasped, her voice trembling. The ice began to crack under her palms, thin fractures spidering outward. She felt a surge of panic. What if it broke too much? What if they both fell in? Her heartbeat drummed in her ears. Then she remembered Henry's voice from all those lessons he never meant to be lessons. "Don't panic, kiddo. Calm is what keeps you alive." She inhaled shakily, pressed her sleeve against her nose, and leaned forward. "Pull her, Ranger." The German shepherd moved instantly, biting the collar of the submerged woman's jacket and tugging backward with a deep growl. The ice gave way with a jagged crack. Water splashed up, numbing Laya's hands. The woman's body slid closer, her blonde hair tangling with ice. Laya grabbed her wrist, shocked by how cold it felt. Like stone. "Come on, please," she whispered through chattering teeth. Together, girl and dog hauled the figure toward shore. The woman rolled onto the snow, motionless, her skin ghost pale except for a faint bruise along her neck. Her nameplate read, Deputy Nora Hayes. She looked to be in her early 30s, tall and lean, her features sharp even in unconsciousness. Strands of golden hair clung to her face, frozen in thin crystals. Laya hovered over her, trembling. "She's alive, right?" she asked the air, pressing her fingers near Nora's mouth. There, the faintest breath, a fragile fog. Relief washed through her like warmth, followed instantly by fear. What had happened to this woman? Why was a police officer alone under the ice? She fumbled for her grandfather's old cell phone, the screen cracked but barely holding a signal. 911, she whispered, dialing with shaking fingers. The call clicked, static hissing in her ear. "Hello? There's someone. She's hurt, by Frost Creek." Her words broke apart in the wind. "Please, send help!" No response came, only static. She tried again, but the screen dimmed, the battery blinking red. No, not now!" she cried. Ranger pressed close, his breath visible in clouds. He stared into the tree line on the opposite bank, body rigid. Then, through the veil of snow, Laya saw it, a figure, too far to see clearly, but undeniably human. Someone stood between the trees, still as a statue, watching. Her throat went dry. "Hello?" she called. The figure didn't move. Ranger growled, deep in warning. The figure stepped back once, then melted into the forest. Gone. Laya's pulse hammered. She looked down at Nora. The woman's lashes trembled faintly. Her lips parted with a fragile groan. "Hang on," Laya whispered. "Someone's coming." She pulled off her coat and wrapped it around the deputy's shoulders. Ranger stood guard, eyes fixed on the shadows across the river. Minutes passed like hours until the distant wail of a siren broke the silence. Red lights flickered through the snow. Paramedics rushed toward them, boots thudding on frozen ground. One of them, a man in a heavy parka, knelt beside Laya. His name tag read Evan Green, tall, mid-30s with tired eyes and a trim beard frosting in the cold. "You did good, sweetheart," he said gently. "You and your dog just saved a life." Laya nodded mutely, unable to find words. As the medics lifted Nora onto a stretcher, Ranger backed away but didn't take his eyes off the trees. The wind picked up again, scattering fine snow like ash. Evan gave Laya a blanket and guided her toward the ambulance. She climbed in, clutching Ranger's collar. As they began to drive, she turned to look out the frosted window. The river was barely visible now, but she thought she saw movement again. Just a flicker of shadow near the place they had pulled Nora out. A shiver ran down her spine. Maybe it was just wind, maybe not. Ranger gave a low, uneasy whine. His gaze stayed fixed on the dark edge of the forest until the ambulance lights disappeared into the storm. Behind them, Frost Creek lay silent once more, except for one set of footprints that led away from the river and vanished into the trees. The storm that swallowed Frost Creek the night before had not yet passed. Snow still fell in lazy spirals over the small Montana town, blanketing roofs and muting every sound until the world felt suspended in breathless silence. Inside Frost Creek General Hospital, the air was dry and sharp with disinfectant, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing down the narrow corridors like the pulse of a machine too tired to rest. 10-year-old Laya Monroe sat on a metal chair outside the emergency wing, wrapped in a hospital blanket that smelled faintly of bleach and plastic. Her small hands clutched Ranger's collar, the old German shepherd resting his head across her knees. His fur was damp, carrying the scent of river water and snow. His eyes, deep amber, intelligent, endlessly alert, followed every shadow that moved across the hall. Every time a door opened, he gave a soft growl, low and protective. Across the hall, nurses moved like ghosts, soft shoes whispering, voices kept low. Nurse Helen Crowley, a woman in her late 40s with dark hair pulled tightly into a bun, leaned down to offer Laya a cup of cocoa. Her uniform was immaculate, and her voice carried the calm rhythm of someone who had seen enough chaos to learn patience. "You did something brave today," she said kindly. "Deputy Hayes is alive because of you." Laya nodded faintly, her voice too small to answer. She only wanted her grandfather. Henry Monroe arrived half an hour later, snow clinging to his coat and hat. His limp was more pronounced than usual, but his eyes burned with worry. When he saw Laya, he exhaled deeply, as if letting go of a weight he'd carried his whole life. "You all right, kiddo?" he asked, crouching beside her. Laya nodded, and Ranger lifted his head to nuzzle Henry's hand. "That's my good boy," Henry murmured, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Still doing your job, huh?" Before Henry could ask more, the swinging door opened and Dr. Owen Hart stepped out from the trauma room. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean build of someone who had once served in uniform. His short chestnut hair was damp with sweat, and faint stubble shadowed his sharp jawline. There was a gravity to his movements, the precision of habit and the exhaustion of a man who had long carried too much. His gray eyes, calm but watchful, spoke of the soldier he once was before becoming a doctor. "Mr. Monroe," Owen said, wiping his hands with a towel, "your granddaughter's fine, and so is your dog. The deputy's stable for now. Hypothermia, bruising around the neck, contusions on her arms. Whoever put her in that water wanted her to stay there." Henry's brows furrowed. "You're saying this wasn't an accident?" Owen hesitated, then nodded slightly. "No, it wasn't." He turned toward Leia, softening his tone. "You did something extraordinary. Most adults would have frozen. You kept your head." Laya looked down at Ranger. "He helped me. He knew before I did." Owen smiled faintly, a rare flicker of warmth. "Smart dog." As the girl was led to a nearby waiting room, Henry followed Owen into his office. The room was cramped but tidy. Stacks of patient files, framed degrees, and a photo on the desk showing a younger Owen in army fatigues beside two other soldiers. One of them had his arm in a sling, both smiling as if daring the world to break them. Henry's gaze lingered on the photo. "You served." Owen nodded. "Afghanistan, Medical Corps. Too many winters that looked like this one." Henry leaned on the chair, his knuckles white. "You think this has something to do with the department?" "Could be," Owen said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Or something bigger. We've had strange shipments coming through lately. Medical supplies, supposedly. Boxes sealed and signed off under emergency authorizations. But some of the documentation's off. Signatures that don't match, manifests that vanish after delivery." "Who's handling the paperwork?" Owen hesitated again. "Mostly logistics, a company called Frost Creek Logistics. They fund part of our transport routes, but they're not supposed to have access to the hospital's storage." Henry's expression hardened. "Crow's outfit. You know them?" Henry gave a grim chuckle. "Everyone in this town knows Richard Crow. He owns half the county and acts like he owns the rest. Money, transport, philanthropy. You dig deep enough, you'll find something rotten." A knock interrupted them. Nurse Helen peeked in, her expression uncertain. "Doctor, there's someone from maintenance here to check the east storage. Says it's urgent." Owen frowned. "At this hour?" Helen shrugged. "Says he was called." Outside, in the storage corridor, the fluorescent lights flickered. The man waiting there was Troy Sanders, mid-30s, average build, with thinning brown hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. His uniform was gray and spotless, his badge reading Facilities Maintenance. But there was something off about him, the way his eyes darted too quickly, or how his fingers fidgeted with the ring of keys at his belt. "Evening, Doctor," Troy said with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard there was a leak in the supply room, just routine check." His voice was smooth, but a hint of impatience bled through. Owen nodded slowly. "All right, I'll escort you." He followed Troy down the corridor, Ranger padding silently behind them, despite Henry's call to stay. The shepherd's instincts prickled, tail low, ears twitching, nose catching something faint in the air. A sweet chemical scent that didn't belong in a hospital. When they reached the locked supply door, Troy crouched to inspect it. "Strange," he murmured. "Someone's already been in here." "How do you know that?" Owen asked. Troy smiled again, though. His hands trembled slightly. "Because the lock's reset backward. That only happens if it's forced." He looked up, meeting Owen's gaze briefly. Too briefly. Could be kids sneaking around, or someone stealing meds. Owen folded his arms. You think? Before Troy could answer, Ranger growled softly, low in his throat. His fur bristled. The man's cologne, or was it something else, filled the narrow space. Troy took an instinctive step back, muttering, "Big dog?" "He only growls when he smells something wrong," Owen said quietly. Troy's smile faltered. "Guess we've all got our instincts." Moments later, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Sheriff Mara Keaton appeared, brushing snow from her coat. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp blue eyes and short sandy hair tucked under a black Stetson. Her presence filled the hall, steady, authoritative, but not without compassion. "Evening, Doc," she greeted. "Got your call." "Took you long enough," Henry muttered from behind. Mara smirked. "Roads are a mess. You try driving uphill with chains that snap every mile." Then her gaze shifted to Troy. "You're new." "Yes, ma'am," Troy replied quickly. "Started last week." She studied him for a moment too long before turning to Owen. "Deputy Hayes, she's awake?" "Not yet, but she will be soon." Mara nodded, but her attention flicked once more toward the maintenance man. "Keep an eye on this one," she said quietly when Troy walked away. "Too many new faces lately." That night, as the halls quieted and the storm softened outside, Owen checked on his patient one last time. Deputy Nora Hayes lay under a thin blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. A faint mark circled her wrist, the shape of a zip tie. Owen frowned, tracing it gently with his gloved finger. Someone had bound her before she went into the river. He noted it in her chart, then stepped into the hall. From the far end, he could see Henry and Leia asleep on a bench, Ranger curled protectively at their feet. The doctor exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. For the first time that night, he felt the weight of exhaustion. He turned off the hallway lights and started toward his office. Then he stopped. A faint creak echoed from the storage wing. He turned, frowning. The corridor was dark now, except for one flickering bulb near the end. A shadow moved, brief, slender, and gone again. Owen reached for the flashlight clipped to his belt. "Hello?" he called. No answer, only the hum of lights. When he stepped closer, he noticed the smell again, faint but unmistakable, sweet, chemical, the same scent Ranger had caught earlier. And on the floor, near the supply door, lay something small and metallic, a spent bullet casing, half buried in dust. Owen knelt, heart pounding. He turned it over in his hand. The shell was clean, fresh. Someone had fired a gun inside the hospital. Recently. He straightened slowly, scanning the hall. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure reflected in the small window at the corridor's end, tall, motionless, watching him. But when he turned, the glass showed only his own face. Outside, the storm howled against the windows. Somewhere deep in the hospital, a door clicked shut. Morning returned to Frost Creek in slow, muted shades of gray. The snow had settled overnight, thick as silence, burying tire tracks, footprints, and evidence alike. The hospital stood on the hill like a watchtower, its windows dim, its halls exhausted. Inside, the world moved quietly, but the storm outside had not taken the secrets with it. Leia Monroe woke to the faint hum of a heater and the soft rise and fall of Ranger's breath against her leg. The old German shepherd was half curled beside her chair, his fur still damp in patches, but his eyes were open, watchful. His gaze shifted toward the door every few seconds, as if waiting for something. Henry sat nearby, his back stiff, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of cold coffee. The night had deepened the lines in his face, carved trenches of fatigue and worry. His limp was worse after the long hours, yet he hadn't closed his eyes. Dr. Owen Hart entered quietly, the morning light behind him slicing through the room like a cold blade. His white coat was creased, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and beneath the calm exterior, his gray eyes carried the same restrained fury that Henry recognized, the kind of anger that only men who'd seen too much death knew how to bury. "She's awake," Owen said. "Deputy Hayes, she's asking for the girl." Leia blinked, startled. "Me?" "She remembers your voice," Owen said simply. "Said she heard you calling her before everything went dark." Henry placed a hand on Leia's shoulder. "You don't have to, kiddo." "I want to," she said softly. They followed Owen through the narrow corridor, lined with old photos of donors and staff, faces of Frost Creek's past. The hospital smelled faintly of bleach and cold metal. When they reached room 214, Owen stopped outside. She's still weak. Don't ask her too much. Inside, Deputy Nora Hayes looked nothing like the frozen figure Leia had pulled from the river. The color had returned to her cheeks, though faint bruises still mapped her neck like fingerprints. Her blonde hair, once tangled and stiff with ice, now lay brushed across the pillow, but her blue eyes held the haunted sharpness of someone who had looked too long into the dark. She managed a small smile. "You're the one who found me," she whispered. Her voice was rough, the kind of hoarseness born from both drowning and secrets. Leia nodded shyly. "You were under the ice. I thought you were—" She didn't finish. Nora's eyes flicked toward Henry, then to Owen. "How long?" 2 days, Owen said. "You're safe now?" "Safe?" Nora gave a bitter laugh that cracked mid-breath. "You have no idea what's coming." Henry leaned forward. "Then tell us." Nora's gaze shifted to the window, where snowflakes drifted like ashes. "I was investigating a shipment, marked medical equipment, routed through Frost Creek Logistics. I traced inconsistencies in the inventory records. Boxes signed in but never opened here at the hospital. I thought maybe it was theft, but it wasn't money they were hiding. It was movement." "Movement?" Owen asked. "Trucks passing through at night, no records, and someone from inside the hospital signed them in." She swallowed hard, wincing. "I confronted the driver at the ridge. Next thing I know, the car's off the road. I woke up under the ice." Her hands trembled, fingers curling around the blanket. "Someone knew I was getting close." Henry's jaw tightened. "You saw who it was?" Nora shook her head. "Only a voice. Male. Calm. Like it wasn't the first time he'd done it." She paused, then looked at Leia. "You need to be careful, sweetheart. The people who find things in Frost Creek tend to go missing." Leia's heart fluttered with fear, but before she could reply, Ranger's ears twitched. He stood abruptly, tail stiff, nose pointing toward the hallway. Owen turned toward the sound. Faint footsteps, then a clatter. A man appeared in the doorway, short, heavy-set, wearing a courier's jacket with the hospital logo. He carried a clipboard and a forced smile. "Apologies," he said quickly. "Wrong room, delivery for storage." Owen frowned. "At 7 a.m? The man shrugged. "Got delayed by the storm." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Who's the shipment from?" The courier hesitated. "Crow Transport." Something passed between the three adults, a tension sharp enough to cut air. Owen forced a smile. "Drop it at receiving. I'll sign later." When the man left, Henry muttered, "You believe that?" "No," Owen said, "and I'm not letting it go unchecked." That afternoon, while Henry escorted Leia to the cafeteria for something warm to eat, Owen descended into the storage level. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering like dying stars. The corridors here were colder, lined with crates stacked too high, each stamped with barcodes and the red initials FCL. He ran his fingers over one of the seals, clean, precise, too perfect. He wasn't alone. From the far end of the aisle, Troy Sanders emerged, the maintenance worker from the night before. His gray uniform was unbuttoned at the collar now, his face pale in the artificial light. "Doctor," he greeted, voice strained. "You're not supposed to be down here without clearance." Owen ignored him. "You handled these boxes last night, didn't you?" Troy's gaze flicked briefly toward the nearest crate. "Just following orders." "Whose?" Troy's hands twitched. "You asked too many questions." He turned, reaching for something behind the nearest stack. A clipboard, perhaps. But Ranger's bark echoed down the stairwell before he could move further. Owen spun toward the sound as Henry appeared at the top of the stairs, breath visible in the cold air. "Leia said you were gone too long," Henry said, descending carefully, his limp heavy. "Looks like she was right." Troy's expression changed. Fear, then calculation. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed. "Neither should you," Henry replied evenly. The fluorescent lights flickered again, plunging the hallway into shadow. For an instant, Owen caught sight of a dark shape at the far end, tall, silent, watching. When the light steadied, it was gone. Troy backed away slowly. "I didn't see anything," he said quickly. "I don't want any part of this." He brushed past them, nearly tripping over a loose pallet before vanishing into the stairwell. Henry exhaled sharply. "He's scared." "Or guilty," Owen murmured. They pried open one of the crates. Inside were rows of sealed vials, neatly arranged in foam casing. Each label bore a medical insignia: Frost Creek Research Division. Only, Frost Creek had no research division. Owen lifted a vial, turning it under the light. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, tinted with something that didn't look like medicine. "What the hell is this?" Henry asked. Before Owen could answer, Ranger growled again. Low, dangerous. Footsteps, not one set, several. Coming from the direction Troy had fled. Owen shoved the vial into his coat pocket. "Move," he whispered. They backed toward the stairwell just as the lights went out completely. In the dark, the air hummed, the soft, distinct sound of a heavy door being locked from the outside. Ranger barked, claws scraping against concrete. Owen reached for the wall, searching for the handle, but found only cold metal. The sound of footsteps faded, replaced by the hiss of ventilation, slowing to a stop. They weren't alone in the dark, and somewhere, faint and mechanical, came the sound of a refrigeration unit powering on. Deep, steady, like a heartbeat buried under ice. The basement air had turned heavy and cold, like a tomb filled with electricity. Owen Hart pressed his hand against the steel door, his breath clouding in the dark. Somewhere above, faint mechanical sounds echoed. The hum of generators, the muffled steps of people moving. They were trapped, and whoever locked them inside had done it quietly, professionally. Henry Monroe's flashlight flickered as he banged against the door with the butt of a wrench. "Solid steel," he muttered. "No way out unless someone opens it from the other side." The old man's breath came unevenly, the weight of years and old wounds pressing down, but his eyes burned with that stubborn flame that refused to go out. Ranger paced beside him, his fur bristling, nose twitching toward the crates that lined the walls. "Whatever they're hiding," Owen said, "it's here." He turned one of the crates open with a crowbar. The foam casing glistened under the dim light. Inside the vials, a faint blue shimmer pulsed like liquid frost. He picked one up carefully. "This isn't morphine," he whispered. Henry leaned closer. "Then what the hell is it?" Before Owen could answer, a metallic clang echoed through the ventilation duct. Ranger growled, tail stiff. Henry looked up just as something moved behind the vents, a shadow crossing the grate. "Someone's up there." Owen crossed the room, climbed onto a crate, and pried open the metal vent. Cold air poured through, stinging his face. A faint draft carried the smell of gasoline and something else. Smoke. "They're not just locking us in," he said grimly. "They're going to burn it. Then we better move fast." Henry's voice was firm, unshaken despite his limp. He scanned the walls, eyes settling on a maintenance hatch half hidden behind a stack of boxes. Together, they cleared the crates. The hatch was narrow, corroded around the edges, bolted shut from years of neglect. Owen jammed the crowbar into the hinge, grunting with effort until the bolt snapped free. "Go," Henry said, motioning Lia's name on his lips even though she wasn't there. Every action he took now was for her, to make sure she'd have someone to come back to. Ranger crawled through first, the dog's body moving silently despite his size. Owen followed, his coat scraping against the metal, then Henry last. They emerged into a tunnel lined with frost and pipes that dripped condensation. The tunnel led upward toward the service exit behind the hospital. As Owen reached the door at the far end, he heard the faint click of a lighter. The smell hit first, sharp, chemical, unmistakable, gasoline. Then a man's voice from above, casual, calm. "Should have stayed out of it, Doc." Owen froze. He recognized that voice. Troy Sanders stepped into view, standing on the stairs leading up to the exit. But this wasn't the nervous maintenance worker from before. His uniform jacket was gone, replaced by a black, waterproof coat. A pistol gleamed in his right hand. His eyes were different too, no longer uncertain, but cold and sure. "You weren't supposed to see this," Troy said, almost regretfully. Henry raised his wrench. "You gonna shoot an old man, boy?" "Depends," Troy said, leveling the gun, "on whether you make this easy." Before he could aim, Ranger lunged. The German Shepherd hit Troy square in the chest, knocking him backward against the wall. The gun fired once, the bullet sparking off the metal railing. Owen grabbed Henry and pulled him down as the second shot exploded into the pipe above them, spraying freezing water. Troy shouted, trying to shove the dog off, but Ranger's jaws locked onto his arm, teeth sinking deep. "Ranger, down!" Owen yelled. The command broke the spell. Ranger released and fell back beside him, growling. Troy scrambled to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Then tell us," Henry demanded. Troy gave a humorless laugh. "You think I'd live long enough to?" He turned, kicked open the emergency exit, and vanished into the storm outside, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Owen stepped out after him. The blizzard had thickened. Wind howled across the parking lot, carrying white shards like glass. The visibility was no more than 20 feet. Henry stumbled behind, one hand braced on the wall. "He's running," Owen said. "Then we follow." They moved through the storm, Ranger leading, nose low to the ground. The snow buried footprints within seconds, but the scent trail was still there. Blood, oil, adrenaline. It led them across the lot, past the frozen ambulance bay, and into the woods beyond the fence. Branches creaked under the weight of snow. Somewhere ahead, the faint beam of a flashlight flickered between the trees. Ranger barked once and bolted. Owen followed, his boots crunching through drifts, breath ragged. When they broke through the tree line, they saw the outline of a vehicle, a dark SUV idling by the old logging road. Troy was inside, clutching his arm, fumbling for something on the passenger seat. Henry aimed the flashlight. The beam caught the license plate. Crow Transport. Owen's pulse quickened. "He's one of them!" The engine roared. The SUV's tires spun, flinging snow as it lurched forward down the road. Owen grabbed the nearest object, a fallen branch, and smashed it through the driver's side window as the car passed. The glass shattered, the vehicle veering off the path for a moment before regaining control and disappearing into the storm. Henry bent over, gasping. "We're not catching that." "No," Owen said, eyes narrowing, "but we know where he's going." Back at the hospital, chaos had already begun. The fire alarm blared through the halls. Flames licked from the basement vents, black smoke rising like ghosts through the ceiling tiles. Nurses scrambled to evacuate patients as snow mixed with falling ash outside. Sheriff Mara Keaton arrived in her SUV, siren cutting through the wind. She leapt out, coat snapping behind her, eyes blazing with focus. Her deputy, Earl Dixon, followed. A man in his early 30s, stocky, brown-skinned, with a buzz cut and a scar running from his temple to jaw. The souvenir of a knife fight years ago. Earl was loyal, brave, and too curious for his own good. "We've got fire in the sublevel," he said, coughing into his sleeve. "Witnesses say 2 men were seen leaving the east exit." Mara spotted Owen and Henry approaching through the storm. "What the hell happened?" Owen didn't waste words. "The fire's no accident. Someone's destroying evidence." Mara's eyes hardened. "Crow?" "His man, Troy. He's wounded, heading toward the Ridge Road." "Earl," Mara ordered, "get units on the ridge and block every route out of town." Henry staggered. "We found what they were hiding. Vials of something. Medical, maybe chemical. Frost Creek Research Division stamped on the label." Mara froze. "There's no Frost Creek Research Division." "I know," Owen said. The sheriff cursed under her breath. "All right, I'll have the fire team secure the building. You two get somewhere safe." But neither man moved. Henry glanced toward the forest, then at Owen. Safe isn't an option anymore. As firefighters moved through the smoke, Owen caught a glimpse of something glinting near the hospital steps, a thin metallic badge half buried in snow. He bent to pick it up. It wasn't a hospital tag. It was a police badge, the engraving dulled, the number scratched out. Mara saw it and went still. "That's not Nora's," she said quietly. "That belongs to someone who vanished 3 months ago, Deputy Raymond Pike." Henry's voice was barely a whisper. "Then they've been doing this a lot longer than we thought." The wind howled again, carrying with it the faint echo of an engine on the ridge, the same direction Troy had gone. The sound faded, swallowed by the storm, but the dread it left behind did not. And in the distance, past the tree line where snow met shadow, a second set of headlights flickered to life, unseen by anyone, following the ridge road at a slower, more patient pace. The storm had slowed to a cruel whisper by dawn. Frost Creek lay bruised beneath the pale morning, smoke rising from the hospital ruins like a confession whispered to heaven. Ash fell over the snow in soft gray flakes, And through that bitter calm, Sheriff Mara Keaton stood beside the wreck of her cruiser, collar turned up against the wind. Her sharp blue eyes scanned the ridge road that wound away into the timberland. Somewhere beyond that line of pines, Troy Sanders was running, and somewhere beyond him, she suspected, was the man who'd ordered it all. Owen Hart tightened the scarf around his neck and loaded another magazine into the rifle Earl Dixon had given him. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fatigue. The night had stripped him of illusion. "Crow won't let Troy live," he said quietly. "He's just another loose end." Henry Monroe, leaning against the truck beside him, coughed into his glove. The old man's face was ghost pale beneath the weak sun. "Then, let's make sure we reach him first." Ranger stood between them, fur bristled, one paw bandaged from a shard of glass he'd caught in the chaos. His amber eyes followed the distant hills with an uncanny alertness, the same instinct that had saved them all before. Mara glanced toward her deputy. "Earl, you're with me on point. Henry, Doc, you take the South Ridge. We'll box him in." Earl nodded, checking the slide of his pistol. He was compact but strong, his movements precise despite the bandage wrapping his forearm. He had the posture of a man who'd spent years carrying regrets he never spoke aloud. "You think Crow's up there?" he asked. Mara's mouth thinned. "If he isn't, he's watching from somewhere close enough to finish what he started." They split into two groups, snow crunching underfoot. The forest loomed. Massive pines hung with frost, their branches sagging low like tired soldiers. The deeper they went, the more the air smelled of oil and smoke. Somewhere, an engine coughed and died. Henry moved slower now, his limp worsening on the incline, but his eyes were sharp. "You should have left me back there," he muttered. Owen shook his head. "You're the only one who knows these ridges." "Yeah," Henry said with a grim smile, "but I never thought I'd be hunting devils in my own backyard." They reached a clearing where the snow had been churned into a wide circle. Fresh tire tracks cut across the slope. An SUV had slid here recently, maybe minutes ago. Then Ranger stiffened, nose pointing toward a half-buried shape near the tree line. Owen brushed away the snow to reveal a man lying face down. It was Troy Sanders. His coat was soaked with blood, a single bullet wound high in his chest. His eyes were open but already glassed over, frozen mid-surprise. Henry knelt beside him. He didn't get far. Owen checked the wound. Close-range shot, left side. The shooter wanted to be sure. There was a faint sound then, an electronic chirp. Owen reached into Troy's pocket and pulled out a small radio transceiver. Static hissed, then a man's voice filtered through, smooth and cold. "Package retrieved. Proceed to extraction site. Ridge coordinates 732. Henry's gaze met his. "Crow!" Before they could respond, Ranger barked sharply and took off uphill. Owen and Henry followed, snow flying around their boots. At the top of the ridge, the trees opened to reveal a secluded clearing where a black helicopter sat idling, blades cutting the wind into white spirals. Standing beside it was Richard Crow himself. He looked exactly as his reputation described him, a man in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive black coat, unsuited for the wilderness. His hair was iron gray, slicked neatly back, his skin pale and almost waxen against the cold. There was a stillness to him that felt wrong, as though nothing human truly lived behind those eyes. Two armed guards stood near the chopper, rifles slung casually but ready. Owen called out, voice hard. "It's over, Crow." Crow turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Hart," he said, tone polite, almost amused. "You're a difficult man to discourage. I suppose that's admirable." His voice carried easily over the wind, calm, measured, the voice of a man who'd bought obedience his entire life. Henry stepped forward, raising his rifle. "You killed good people, deputies, soldiers, my friends." Crow's smile didn't falter. "Collateral damage. Frost Creek thrives because people like me take the burdens others won't." "You trafficked drugs and weapons through a hospital," Owen snapped. "You turned patients into cover stories." Crow tilted his head. "You think too small, Doctor. It wasn't about profit, it was about control. There's a world coming that rewards those who prepare." Earl and Mara emerged from the trees behind him then, guns drawn. "Funny," Mara said coldly. "Looks to me like your world's about to end." Crow's eyes flicked toward her. "You're too late." He snapped his fingers. The nearest guard swung his weapon toward the sheriff. But before he could fire, Ranger lunged from the side, slamming into the man's legs. The rifle went off wild, the shot echoing across the ridge. Mara ducked and returned fire. The second guard dropped instantly. The helicopter's engine roared louder. Crow turned to board it, but Henry's voice cut through the chaos. "You're not walking away again!" The old man fired once. The bullet struck Crow's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He fell against the snow, crimson blooming across his coat. The helicopter began to lift, its pilot panicking. Crow crawled toward it, dragging his injured arm, but Ranger reached him first, standing over the man with a low, rumbling growl. Owen approached slowly, rifle raised. "It's done," he said. Crow's lips curled into a strange, almost pitying smile. "You think you've stopped something. You've only delayed it." His gaze shifted toward the vials hanging from Owen's belt. "You still don't know what you found." Owen's voice was steady. "Then tell me." But Crow only laughed softly, blood freezing at the corner of his mouth. "You'll see it soon enough." The helicopter jerked violently. Earl had climbed aboard and pulled the pilot out, tackling him into the snow. The rotor slowed, whining to a stop. Mara cuffed Crow while Owen pressed gauze to the wound to keep him alive long enough to face trial. When it was over, the ridge was silent, except for the hiss of the dying wind. The snow had stopped falling. The first rays of sun slipped through the clouds, lighting the forest in pale gold. Later that week, Frost Creek breathed again. The hospital's burned halls were cordoned off, and the FBI swarmed the site. They uncovered dozens of hidden compartments beneath the foundation, proof of smuggling routes running through half the state. Crow's arrest made national news. The town that had once been built on secrets was now rebuilt on truth. In the courtyard outside the sheriff's office, Laya sat bundled in her red scarf, Ranger beside her. His bandaged paw rested gently on her boot, eyes half closed under the weak sun. Henry leaned on his cane nearby, a proud smile softening the lines of his weathered face. Owen joined them, coat unbuttoned, exhaustion finally replaced with quiet relief. "They said Crow's in federal custody," Henry murmured. "Won't see daylight again." Owen nodded. "Maybe. But what he said about the vials?" "We'll deal with that when it comes," Henry replied, voice firm but kind. "For now, this town deserves peace." Across the street, Sheriff Mara watched them through her office window, her reflection ghosted against the glass. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a small, tired smile. And as the wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and thawing snow, Frost Creek began to heal. That night, when the world was finally still, Ranger stirred in his sleep. His ears twitched toward the horizon. In the distance, across the ridge, a faint blue light flickered once, brief, silent, and cold, before disappearing into the dark. Sometimes God's miracles don't come as thunder or fire. They come quietly, through courage, kindness, and love. The storm may be cold, but His light never fades. If this story touched your heart, share it, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith and hope. May God bless you and your family and guide you through every storm.